Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating, courtroom-style defense of the biblical Passover found in our source material. We'll be looking closely at historical and textual evidence to build what the text calls an airtight case against accusations of historical corruption. If you love digging into the nitty-gritty details of ancient texts and seeing exactly how historians verify them, you're absolutely going to love this one.
So here's the primary counterclaim we're investigating today. It's an accusation made by some Islamic critics that the 10th plague in Egypt, the death of the firstborn, never actually happened. The claim argues it was added to the Torah much later by Jewish scribes, specifically for financial gain. It's a pretty bold claim, right? But does the source material find that it actually holds up to scrutiny? Let's find out.
To tackle this thoroughly, the source unpacks the argument systematically. We'll cover 1. The corruption accusation. 2. A massive textual conspiracy theory. 3. Dismantling the financial motive. 4. Early historical evidence. 5. Comparing the plagues. And finally, 6. The land inheritance paradox.
Section 1. The corruption accusation.
Okay, so the core claim here is that the 10th plague was just a later, financially motivated fabrication. Now, for this to be true, the source points out it would require proving a massive, highly coordinated cover-up by Jewish scribes over centuries. They wouldn't have just tweaked a single verse. They would have had to completely invent a foundational historical event and somehow weave it perfectly into the cultural and religious fabric of an entire nation.
Section 2. A massive textual conspiracy. Think about the sheer volume of additions this would literally require. If Passover was just a later invention, scribes would have had to corrupt every single occurrence throughout all of Scripture. They'd have to go completely out of their way to seamlessly embed it everywhere. We are talking about retroactively altering Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Kings, Ezekiel, Ezra, and the Psalms. The source even notes an interesting detail. Jews didn't even add wine to the festival textually. That actually came in the post-Old Testament era. So pulling off such widespread corruption across so many texts without leaving a messy historical footprint, it's highly improbable.
And the text argues this conspiracy would have to stretch even further. Jesus, who was a Jew, celebrated Passover. Since Muslims revered Jesus as the prophet Isa, holding to this corruption theory actually means affirming that their revered prophet celebrated a completely fake, extorted festival and simply didn't know any better. Furthermore, the Apostle Paul quotes Passover in 1 Corinthians 11 as established oral tradition he received, which places its widespread acceptance incredibly early in New Testament literature.
Section 3. Dismantling the financial motive.
Let's test this supposed financial motive, using the text's own rules. Real corrupt extortion is centralized, right? It funnels wealth to the top, and it's highly profitable for priests or leaders. But the Torah's instructions for Passover were completely localized. Families used their own flocks right at home. They were commanded to consume the whole lamb and literally burn any leftovers. The priests gained absolutely no meat and no money from the setup whatsoever.
Actually, it gets even worse for the corruption theory. The Torah explicitly built in exceptions for the poor. If you couldn't afford a lamb, you could join a neighbor's household or offer 2 turtle doves, and as a last resort, Leviticus 5:7 says you could offer a simple handful of flour. Now ask yourself, why in the world would a centralized institution trying to extort money explicitly write in loopholes for the poor to just offer a handful of flour? The source argues it makes zero financial sense.
Section 4. Early historical evidence. Now, it is absolutely true that by the 1st century AD, a corrupt institution tried to monopolize temple sacrifices. These were the money changers Jesus famously drove out. But here's the catch. They were actually violating the Torah's instructions. Texts containing the Passover, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Greek Septuagint, and the Samaritan Pentateuch, all predate that 1st century corruption by hundreds of years.
A really crucial piece of evidence highlighted here is the Elephantine Papyrus, which dates all the way back to 419 BC. Often called the Passover letter, it explicitly discusses the festival of unleavened bread and the 14th of Nisan. These are events that are entirely dependent on Passover. This artifact definitively grounds the festival in history over 400 years before Christ, long before any of that Second Temple institutional corruption crept in.
Section 5. Comparing the plagues.
The Clear Quran provides a really helpful footnote on Surah 17:101 that outlines their version of events. It lists the 9 signs of Moses as the staff, the hand, famine, shortage of crops, floods, locusts, lice, frogs, and blood. What's vital to notice here is the claim that these signs were meant as proofs for Pharaoh and the Egyptians,
But if we go read Exodus chapter 4, the signs of the staff and the leprous hand were actually given to Moses to perform specifically for the Israelites, just to prove to them that Yahweh sent him, not as plagues against Pharaoh.
When we put these accounts side by side, the source notes some massive inconsistencies. The Quranic account changes the order entirely. For instance, it puts the plague of blood last, whereas in Exodus, it's the very first plague. It's also missing several plagues entirely, including darkness, which, by the way, is strongly corroborated by the ancient Dead Sea Scrolls in Psalm 105. And most critically for our topic today, the Quranic list completely misses the climactic 10th plague of the firstborn.
Get this, out of the 10 biblical plagues, only 3, or maybe 4, actually match the Quranic account: locusts, frogs, blood, and lice. The text poses a massive logical hurdle for the corruption theory here. If Jewish scribes were just inventing all this, why would they go completely out of their way to remove existing signs like floods and famine, change the order entirely, and invent 6 brand new plagues out of thin air?
Section 6. The Land Inheritance Paradox.
The Quran, specifically in Surah 26 verses 52 through 60, explicitly states that the Israelites were awarded the springs, gardens, and splendid residences of their Egyptian oppressors. In other words, the Islamic narrative claims the Israelites inherited Egypt as well as Canaan. But the Torah, the text that was supposedly corrupted by greedy Jewish scribes, claims the Israelites wandered the desert and only inherited Canaan.
This analysis leaves us with one incredibly powerful question. If you are a corrupt, money-hungry scribe forging foundational documents, would you intentionally edit your text to write yourself out of inheriting the wealthy, lush land of Egypt? The argument suggests that voluntarily giving up a divine claim to prime real estate completely shatters the financial motive. It leaves us with a fascinating, logically structured, and seemingly airtight defense of the historical Passover from our source material. Keep asking those tough questions, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.